You're listening to Spiritual Matters with Energy.
And our first guest this evening was recommended to us, I can tell you, by Eckhart Tolle, and that's quite some recommendation. She spent many years looking for fulfillment in her life and finally discovered it whilst visiting India. She joins us now here on Spiritual Matters. Good evening, Gangaji.
Hello, Energy and all.
Lovely to have you with us.
No, thank you. I'm honored.
Now, we'll come on to talk about your time in India shortly. But I see you had a couple of spiritual experiences as a young child, and I wondered if you could maybe talk about what happened there and how they affected you.
Well, I can only call them spiritual experiences in retrospect. At the time, they were horrific. The strongest one was when I was about 6 years old. I felt my body disappearing, and maybe it wasn't a spiritual experience. Maybe it was just an anxiety attack, but it frightened me deeply, and of course no one around me knew to put it into a spiritual context, so it frightened everybody. And at the time, they gave me some little pills to take, and I took these little pills every time I started to experience my body disappearing. And I did that for years. I didn't have to take them regularly, but when it would start to happen, I would take one and I would come back into my body. And decades later, I was meditating and I felt this experience starting, and I didn't reach for the little pill. It was in the context of meditation, so I allowed it to happen. And then I could see it was a spiritual experience. It was actually very beautiful. But it was beautiful because I finally surrendered to it. I had been resisting it, fighting it, and running from it for many years before that moment. But it did start when I was a child. Yeah.
So how did that change you when that happened, that realization that it was something spiritual?
Oh, it was a breakthrough, because maybe my search really started then. This was in the 70s, and spirituality was a sort of a lifestyle. And so I was a part of that lifestyle, but it wasn't grounded in anything real. It was abstract, and it was the clothes we wore and the songs we sang and calling each other brother and sister. And it was quite beautiful, but once that experience happened, I recognized there's something so much bigger than what I know, so much bigger than what I call me, or bigger than any concept I had. And it shook me to the ground, and I began a true spiritual search. I began studying with different teachers, Tibetan teachers that would come through the San Francisco area, and meditating more seriously, and really trying to live my life in a way that was in alignment with what I understood at that point of spirituality.
And can you talk about some of those teachers along the way, what your experience was with them?
Oh, well, my first major teacher was Kalu Rinpoche. He was a Tibetan Lama Rinpoche who came to our small town in Northern California and actually appointed my husband Eli as head of a little small Dharma center. And we had Tibetan meditation in our house, and I think maybe at most 5 other people came, and we would get up every morning at 5 o'clock and meditate. And it was beautiful, and we had phenomenal experiences. We did different empowerments, Green Tara and Mahakala and Chinrezi, just these beautiful visualizations of the deity coming into the body, and just it was extraordinary. But then from that I went to Zen meditation, which was maybe the opposite spectrum, sort of like a cool shower after all this quite vivid, phenomenal, spiritual, whatever you want to call it, experience. And that actually touched me in a way more. It was more, for me, it was more grounding. It was just simply sitting, just simply watching the breath. And I maybe would have experiences of relative quiet, but I wouldn't say I had any breakthrough in that. But it was very positive for me as a person, just given the type of person I am. It brought my mind activity into a little slower wave form rather than the fragments that was manifesting. And And it just turned me toward the east. But after some time, I recognized that I wasn't a great meditator, and I didn't want to do the prostrations that were part of the Tibetan Buddhism, and I just wasn't a good student. And so I started praying for a good enough teacher that could make up for my lack as a student. And this was in 1990, so it's like almost 20 years after my spiritual search began. I met my final teacher, Papaji, who really just happened to be in India. I wasn't interested in an Indian guru. That's not what was in my mind. What was in my mind is I need help. And I was open to receive that help in whatever way it showed up. And just by a series of wonderful circumstances or miracles, my husband found this teacher, and he called me to come to India to meet him. And I recognized this is the one I've been waiting for.
Was that immediate when you saw him?
Well, I had heard of him, so I knew he was a legitimate teacher, and Eli had been writing me about him, and I sat with one of his students who was on fire with him, and so I was prepared to recognize him, I would say, but yes, when I saw him, he opened the door and he invited us in for tea, and he was just filled with this, I guess I would have to say, welcome. His whole presence was a welcome. And it was really good news for me. And I recognized this is the answer to my prayer. So I paid very close attention.
And what was it with him that helped you so much?
Well, I asked him what to do. I thought he would give me another practice, or he'd give me a mantra, or he would tell me how to be a better person. And he told me to stop. And he told me to be still. Stop doing anything. And I had heard that before, maybe do nothing. And so I sort of tried to do nothing, and he could see that. And he said, no, really stop. Just be still. And finally I let that in, and that was a holy word for me, stop. So in that willingness to stop, I stopped defining myself. I stopped remembering myself as this thing, this person with a history. I stopped identifying myself as a female or as an American or a seeker. And this all happened very quickly. And in that, I was just bathed in the radiance that is the consciousness that each of us lives in and is inhabited by. And it was actually very simple. And my mind arose to question it and fight it and doubt it. But when I was willing just to return to being still, to just stop, there is the radiance, there is the bounty, there is the love, and there is the fulfillment. And so that's what he has been for me. And certainly in that time I spent with him, and I went back to visit him several other times. I think I went 5 times to India. And then he died in 1997. And his death, even though I mourned it, was just as important as meeting him, because he died and I saw a video of his funeral pyre, and I recognized what couldn't die, that he had pointed me to the truth, and that in that he is alive in me, as everyone we've ever loved is alive in us, and offering us that love, whether in the form or gone, dead. So he changed my life energy just radically.
After spending much time with Papaji, he wanted you to return to the West to share your experience with others, and you were reluctant to go. Why was that, given that you had so much faith in him?
Well, it didn't fit my idea of the qualifications a teacher needed. I hadn't read Ramana Maharshi, who was his guru, and so I didn't really know mentally or intellectually what I would say to people. And I said that to him. I really thought he'd made a mistake. I said, but Papaji, I don't know what I would say. And he said, that's good. Then you'll only be able to speak from your direct experience. He let me know. He didn't want me to be a preacher. He didn't want me to go out and try to convert people. And he said, those people who resonate with what you have to say will come to you, will listen to you, and you are there to confirm them in the truth of who they are and to challenge them, to push them to move out of the concept of that into the direct experience. And so finally I did just have to trust him. And he said, don't worry about it. People will catch fire and you invite them over for tea and just share your experience. And that's the way it started. It started very small and very natural, and that's been happening for almost 21 years now, and it's always a surprise to me, and I can't say I know what I'm going to say. It has so much to do with the synergy of the people who are present and how we meet one another. But it's reliable and it's trustworthy because I'm not teaching anything or preaching.
So when you go to a talk, do you have any idea of what you're going to be saying beforehand, or do you just completely go with your presence and what comes from that?
Well, sometimes something will come to me, like on the way over or as I'm getting dressed, and either I will bring that up or not, but sometimes an inspiration will occur, and sometimes I don't have an idea. We usually sit in silence for 10 or 15 minutes before the speaking of the meeting happens, and in that silent space as the mind just settles in, and sometimes it comes from that. But it's always a surprise, and so sometimes I have an idea of what I will say, and I follow that idea or I don't, and sometimes it just comes out of the blue.
You mentioned before about the importance of just stopping.
Yeah.
And your teachings seem to be very much about letting go of everything on the premise that it's possible to awaken regardless of what's going on in our lives. Why is it, do you feel, that seems to be so difficult for many people to do?
Well, the easy answer is attachment. We are attached to so many things that are going on in our lives, and the horror is that we're attached to our suffering. We're attached to our identity as the one who suffers. And we have lots of proof to legitimize that attachment in our history and in our projections of the future, in our heartbreaks, in our failures. But it's our attachment to that keeps us from receiving what is here deeper than the failure. We assume, if we're just normal human beings, that if we can get success, we will be saved from failure. But it's much deeper than that. We have to finally discover what is deeper than success or failure, what's fulfilled, whether we get what we want or we don't. And really that's my role in people's lives, is through conversation and through sitting with them, just to invite them back to the spaciousness of the open mind, which is what stopping means to me. And many people can do that in an instant. And in that instant, or from that instant, you then can recognize how we choose suffering. Maybe before you have an instant of letting go of your suffering, it is just automatic to suffer. But when you have a true experience, an essential experience of the limitlessness of consciousness, and that consciousness is life, and that you are this consciousness, then the habits of mind are more noticeable. You can recognize the noise of the habits of mind. Mind itself is not the problem. Mind is beautiful, but we develop habits and grooves, and we cling to them, and it's tragic in many cases, and then it can even be funny in many other cases, and we, each of us, if we are truly desiring the truth, because it's normal to be attached to all of our stories of suffering, and so it's almost counterintuitive to let it all go. But when you really want freedom and you really want the truth of who you are, you find the courage for a moment to lose everything you think of yourself and everything you think of the world, everything you think of other, and to recognize what is always here. And it's very good news.
You talk about the truth there, and clearly you were determined to find it for yourself. I'm interested in understanding what it is that makes somebody like you follow that necessity to find that in your life, and other people just accept their lives as they are.
Well, it's a mystery to me, honestly. I think some people are happy accepting their lives as they are, and then there's some of us who aren't happy with our lives and don't feel that we can accept it, even if we want to. I spent much of my life just trying to conform and trying to be normal and trying to be like other people. And when I look back on that, I can see I had a relatively wonderful life, but it wasn't enough. There was something in me that was craving something, and I kept feeding it with a better life, a better relationship, better health, and I actually did acquire those things, but it didn't touch this yearning. So I don't know what the answer is. I don't know to whom this appears, but I know that there are those listening, and there are those people out there who aren't satisfied with their lives, even if their lives are quite good. And there is a yearning for something that is bigger than what they know. And that's who I'm speaking to. For the other people who are happy with their lives as they are, I think that's wonderful. God bless them.
Now, during your search, was there any time at all that you thought maybe this isn't going to work, I'm not going to find what I'm looking for?
Oh, yes. Yes, I had many moments of discouragement. I mean, I would have beautiful experiences, and then this old personality would reappear. And I had these experiences of clarity, of oneness, of bliss, but it seemed that the ground was really a ground of suffering. And when I met my teacher and he told me to stop, and when I was really able to stop, that just switched. The ground became a ground of fulfillment. It's the ground of my life. And then the events of my life appeared on that ground. I'm not deliriously happy every moment of my life. I have emotions just like all humans, and I have opinions, and I have desired outcomes, and sometimes they aren't met, and I have all the emotions, but the ground is a ground of fulfillment, and then these emotions arise from that fulfillment and either deny the fulfillment or contradict it or reinforce it, but they don't touch it finally. And so that was the shift, but it took me a while to even be able to tell the truth that really what I wanted more than anything was the discovery of the truth, peace, freedom. Because before that, I wanted that, but I also wanted to be having a good time. You know, I naturally wanted my daughter to be happy. I wanted to be in a good relationship. I had a list of what I wanted. And when finally peace and freedom and truth moved to the top of that list, then I could give myself 100%. And in that moment, it happened very quickly. I'd say from the moment I realized I needed a true teacher, and I prayed for this true teacher, it must have been 6 months, and I met Papaji. And that really changed everything, just the meeting.
And do you believe this journey is available to everybody if they're tenacious enough that they can reach that place?
Absolutely.
Regardless of conditions?
Absolutely, yes. It arises from your own heart. So the very fact of it arising is the proof that it's here. So really, one of my roles is simply to turn people back to that original arising. And if we stop trying to feed that with experiences or elevated definitions of where we will get, but we just return to the original yearning, we will see that it's endless in its resolution and it's endless in its revelation. So that, or whenever it arises, because for some people it arises when they're children, and some people it arises on their deathbed, but whenever it arises, that in itself is the awakening, really. And our minds come in to start to condition that awakening. But if we're willing to return to wherever we feel that light or that search for the light, without feeding it anything, just to feed it our own attention rather than to give it objects. And most of my spiritual search was in trying to be a better meditator, to get a better experience, to get an experience that would not leave me, to be in bliss, different things with different traditions, of course. But when Papaji told me to stop, all of that was just gone. I wasn't a better meditator or a worse meditator. I am consciousness itself.
It seems incredible to hear your story of years of searching and finally just hearing the word stop.
Yes.
And that's it. That's
simple. Everything else had been so complicated.
And this radio program, Spiritual Matters, that we're broadcasting will be reaching people tonight that don't have an interest in or maybe put off even by the word spirituality. Mm-hmm. What would you say to them?
Well, I understand that. I'm sometimes put off by the word spirituality.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean it can be such a sideshow, and it can seem so flaky, and it can seem totally selfish and navel-gazing. So I understand that, and that's when I was speaking earlier about I wasn't looking for a guru in India. I consider myself too sophisticated for that. So I can understand it, and let's throw away the word spirituality then. Let's don't use that word. Then we could use the word happiness, or we could use the word fulfillment, or we could just use the word for some unknown, indefinable yearning of the heart. And I like to meet people where they are. I go into prisons and meet with prisoners, and they have not led spiritual lives, and they too don't have any patience with any kind of la-di-da kind of spirituality. It's very grounded in what does this mean for me, and that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in speaking plainly, and I'm interested in it being concrete in someone's life, not an abstraction, not something to worship or to imitate, but something to discover within oneself.
You're listening to Spiritual Matters with Energy. Our guest this hour is Gangaji. You mentioned earlier about this, well, I think you call it the Thunderbolt of realization, don't you? Where you became aware of being part of a one consciousness, if you like. You touched on that, but can you share with us in a bit more detail what that experience is?
Well, it's not bound by any beginning or end. It's a recognition that from the initial experience as a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old, when I recognized I am, that consciousness has not moved. It was the background of everything, and now it infuses everything. It's both the background and the foreground and the middle ground. And so it's not that I gained anything. It's that I recognized what is always here. And there was a sense that I kind of had to slap my forehead when I recognized it, because I couldn't say I didn't know it was here, but I was jumping beyond that to get something else. And when my teacher directed me to stop, it stopped my search. It stopped my pursuit of something, and I had to, in an instant, recognize the hugeness of this that I am. And each of us shares this I whatever our language, we all say I in some form or another. And if we're willing to turn our attention back to that I, we will see that's what this particular body or personality or history appears in. And the I itself is the living consciousness that is recognizing itself as consciousness, as perhaps recognized itself as a particular form. But if the recognition is limited to a form, there arises a yearning for something that is limitless. And finally, the recognition is what is limitless and what is in form. So both vast and tiny, minute, one lifetime, which is over in a flash, it holds all of consciousness. It's a resolution of all the paradoxes.
And why do you feel, or do you have any thoughts on why we've lost this and we've come to feel so separated?
Well, we've become materially conditioned. You know, we live in a material universe, and even though science has advanced and quantum mechanics teaches us that it's not material, it is in flux, it is in movement, it is mostly space, that's still the way we perceive the world. And so that's what we see. We are trained to see that way. Our educational systems train us or reinforce that training. And just as individuals, we are trained to see ourselves as something that needs protecting, because obviously the body does need protecting. But that becomes our world view, me and then other, them. And while it's true for the body, when we're willing to see deeper, we see that when we are looking into the eyes of another, or we're looking into the sky, or we're looking into the ocean, we can see reflected back the vastness that is present in all form. So I would say our material drives have definitely clouded our vision. But also, I think it could be just a maturation factor in that at a certain time there is a readiness to see beyond the limits of this definition of who I am. And I was ready. I'm sure many who are listening are ready. And in a real sense, I think humanity as a whole is ready. We are being forced to grow up out of our adolescent infatuation with me into something that is bigger.
Okay, that brings us on nicely to global change, which I wanted to talk to you about. And we're clearly at a time where a higher level of consciousness is emerging on the planet. What's your understanding of what's actually happening here?
Well, I know we have an opportunity, and that's the opportunity to open and discover how we should be used, what's being called for. It seems to me that each generation that comes with ideas of how the past generations messed it up and how we will fix it. But I believe this is a time for something deeper and fresher, and that we are open to discover what is here rather than we know what we should do. We are, just the weather itself is clearly proof of upheaval, and that will shake us out of our denial. And I have faith that we have the capacity to discover what we need to do practically in terms of the planet or in terms of taking care of each other and other species, but also in a very true and deep sense, what is waiting for us in the bigger realm of our life. How is our life to be used? One lifetime or the life of the species? Then it's fine. It's the song that you were playing when I first came on, We Are the World. I thought that was so appropriate. There's a way where we stop saying that I am the world and you are not the world. We recognize that the world is spirit. It's spirit in form, and we can discover that within ourselves and all around us.
It's interesting you mentioned that song. I mean, there's a good example of where the message is being put out there for people, but it doesn't seem to be really working, does it?
Well, some days I think it is. Some days it looks really good and some days it looks bleak. So I couldn't really say. I'm not a prophet, I really don't know. But what else are we going to do, We can just, my prayer is to speak as clearly as possible and for my words to be used in the deepest way by whoever they land in. And then it's out of my hands. I don't know what the outcome should look like. I don't know who will catch fire. I just know that given the other options, this is a great way to live one's life.
All right. Now, you say you're not a prophet. I was going to ask you if you have a sense of what's in store for us over the next, say, 20, 25 years. I mean, do you feel we're going to have to go through greater suffering to come out the other side?
I don't know, Energy. I really don't know. I wouldn't say inherently that's true. We could come out right in this instant. But often it takes suffering to shock us out of our complacency. We know that perhaps individually, and we can see that there's great resistance to making particular change that seems really necessary for the planet, just based on our comfort. But if we're shocked deeply enough, we will be shocked open and awake. So I don't know. I hope it doesn't have to get horrible, but if it gets horrible, we're here. We're here to serve what's true.
Okay, you're well aware, Gangaji, that Eckhart Tolle suggested that we speak to you when I interviewed him. He said that you were one of the people that we should have on the show. I'd like to put the same question to you. Which other spiritual teachers out there do you feel doing good work in promoting consciousness?
Oh, my goodness. I would say anybody who is teaching, who has a response, is doing really good work.
Any inspirations, though?
I wish I'd known you were going to ask
I think you better say Eckhart Tolle.
Oh, well, definitely I would say Eckhart Tolle. Let's say Eckhart Tolle. The truth is, of course I know Eckhart and he is so dear and I appreciate his endorsement. And I give my endorsement to a lot of people, but you put me on the spot and I can't imagine who I would select out from all of the teachers and all of the students. Really, I'm so sorry.
Are there any special...
Could I email you this later?
I think that we'll do it next week on the show. We'll do Gangaji's top 10 spiritual teachers. How's that?
Okay, good.
I also just wanted to ask you about people you've worked with, if there's any sort of particular story, amazing story that you'd like to share with us. A breakthrough that happened, perhaps.
Well, to me, the most inspiring, and everyone is inspiring, and it is thrilling to be present when someone just breaks through their story of suffering or their story of limitation. But it's so inspiring to speak to a prisoner, and it's both inspiring to be with the prisoners, but to bring that back to people on the outside and to let them know that it's possible when you're living in hell, because prison is hell, and you have no real control over your life. And in a true sense, or relatively true sense, your life has ended, and it's ended in failure. Still, there is this possibility to open and discover yourself as fulfillment and free. That you can be free in hell, you can be free in prison. And to be present with these certain guys as I have been in certain places, I think of, it makes me cry in joy. And then to bring that news to people in our affluent lifestyle and our relatively free lifestyle, and to let them know that this is the freedom that is not bound by anything relative. I'd say that's my most moving.
Gangaji, thank you so much for being with us. It's been enlightening talking to you.
Oh, I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, Energy, and thank you for giving me the opportunity.
So, no problem, and I hope to see you on Saturday.
Yes, wonderful.
Okay, take care.
You've been listening to an interview from spiritualmatters.org.